Two very big names on the defensive side of the ball still left in free agency. If you were the Rams and could only pick one, which one do you choose?
You are Locked On Rams, your daily Los Angeles Rams podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Rams your first listen every single day. My name is Travis Rogers. I am your host of Locked On Rams. I also host the Rams pregame show and postgame show on their flagship station, 710 ESPN. Make sure you're checking us out on Twitter as well. Our Locked On Rams YouTube channel is always a good place to get all of your Rams content. You can subscribe to that and click that subscribe button in your podcast feed. Why don't you just do it right now? That way we don't have to keep talking about it. That way you're ready to go and you get your Locked On Rams every single day. Lots to get into on this one, including some guys, even though we're getting closer to the draft, some guys already on the Rams roster that have an opportunity to step up and do some very big things coming up in the upcoming season. Plus, as we get closer to that draft, there are two very big areas of need that the Rams have. Which one will they prioritize heading into that draft? And let's jump right into it right here. Let's talk about the two big names that are still left in free agency, both of them on the defensive side of the ball. And both of them, at least one of them, kind of sort of connected via some rumors to the Rams. The other one, not so much. But when it comes to big names in free agency, when it comes to big names in trade, it's basically when it comes to big names with the Rams, you always have to put them in the mix. Of course, one of the guys that we've talked about a little bit on the last couple of Locked On Rams episodes is Tyrann Mathieu, who is a free agent. The other one is Stephon Gilmore, who is a free agent as well. Obviously spent a lot of time with the New England Patriots and most recently with the Carolina Panthers. So a very good player indeed. Both of these guys would fit in, I think, very well with the Rams. They're both very good players. They both fill areas of need with the Rams, although they play pretty different positions, both of them in the secondary, but different types of secondary players. So, first of all, it's a little bit weird to say you can only pick one, right? When the Rams have made a habit over the last few seasons of just taking whoever they want and they'll figure out the finances later along the way. But if you had to go between Mathieu and Gilmore, and these are the two players that you're trying to decide, this is what the decision basically comes down to. Do you want the better player or do you want the player who does more things? Because those are your two options there. The better player is Gilmore. Gilmore is better at what he does than what Tyrann Mathieu is doing what he does. Now, they're both very good. We're talking about degrees of goodness as opposed to one guy being good and the other guy not being good. So it's not like if you go in the other direction, you're not getting a good player. You are. But Gilmore, what he would bring to this team is somebody that would, essentially replace Darius Williams, only he's a much better football player than Darius Williams. He's going to bring a lot more. He's more like Jalen Ramsey than he is Darius Williams. He's a guy that makes plays. He's a guy that can intercept the ball. He's a guy that can lock his defender down. He's a guy that can kind of do whatever it is you need your cornerback to do. And let's just stop for a minute right here and talk about what that might look like a little bit with the Rams having two different guys, one in Jalen Ramsey and one in Gilmore, one on each side of the field. And all of a sudden you got Aaron Donald coming after you. You've got Leonard Floyd coming after you. You've got Bobby Wagner as your new linebacker. That would give opposing offenses, in particular opposing quarterbacks, very, very few good options. Very few good options because, look, if you want to look at Jalen Ramsey, okay. I mean, good luck with that. You want to go to Gilmore? Okay. Good luck with that. And, by the way, you got to do this in about 2.5 seconds or Aaron Donald's going to be back there and messing you up. Okay. And then if you want to try to run the ball, Bobby Wagner is there. There are not a lot of good options underneath that scenario. He is probably the best player left at his position in all of free agency. He's a guy that you could immediately put in there and I think would thrive very, very well. Gilmore it is. The other option, of course, is Mathieu, who is probably not the cover guy. And I shouldn't even say probably. He's not the cover guy that Gilmore is. But what he does do is he lets you fill pretty much whatever it is you need. Think about this, and I'm going to take a leap of faith here that if you are a Rams fan, there's probably a pretty good significant chunk of you that cross over that are Los Angeles Dodger fans as well. What have the Dodgers figured out better than most other teams in Major League Baseball? They figured out that if you have guys that can do more than one thing, you're just much more dangerous than somebody that's got, okay, I got a shortstop, I got a second baseman, I got a center fielder, I got a first baseman. Think about what the Dodgers do. They added Freddie Freeman, who's kind of in a one-spot thing, but you got Max Muncy. You can play first base, second base, and third base. You've got Trey Turner, who can play shortstop, second base, and in a pinch, you could play the outfield. You've got Chris Taylor, who you could literally put at 7 different positions on the field, everywhere but on the mound and behind the plate. Cody Bellinger, while a very, very good center fielder, can also play a serviceable first base. Mookie Betts can play all 3 outfield positions and can also fill in at second base. Really the only guy that they have, or maybe 2 guys that they have, and I'm not counting catchers, obviously, but the only guys that are kind of anchored to their spots are Freeman and Turner on the corners. And then you've got some guy, and with the DH, you can mix and match and do a bunch of different things there. But what it does is it allows you to get a bunch of guys in the lineup, a lot of guys out of the lineup, play some matchups along the way. The point of talking about the Dodgers right now is to explain to you that the Rams could do something similar with that with Tyrann Mathieu. You need him to line up in the slot as your slot corner? Fine, he can do that. You need him to play on the corner, on the edge a little bit? Yeah, he can do that as well. Now, maybe that's not his strong suit, but you can get through a game or a series or even maybe a month or so if you need to do that. You need him to play in the box and play almost like a linebacker position. He can do that as well. You need him to play over the top and be kind of a center fielder safety who can go, take away their other best player, take away some throws down the field that can absolutely hit and bring some physicality to the secondary. He can do that. So that's the decision that Les Snead, if in fact they are weighing the options of these 2 guys, and time will tell. The price points on the 2 players are roughly the same, right? They're both going to demand about the same amount of money, which is good money but nothing crazy. So would you rather have a guy who's going to be as good at his position as you could probably hope for in Gilmore, or do you want a guy that can cover 5 or 6 different things along the way in Tyrann Mathieu? For me, for my money, give me the guy that can do more things, because the gap that you're going to have from Gilmore to whether, let's say, it's Robert Rochelle. We'll talk about him coming up here a little bit later on. Maybe in the 3rd segment of Locked On Rams, we'll get to him. And maybe a David Long. He's a better player than those guys. There's no question about it. But you could also put Mathieu in that role, and then you can put Mathieu in the secondary. You can put Mathieu at linebacker. You can put Mathieu in the slot. You can put him so many different places that, and again, what's the greatest wild card in the NFL? Injuries, right? You just never know who's going to be healthy from one season to the next. And if you have a guy that, okay, I can fill him in here, I can fill him in here, there's 4 or 5 different places I can put him on any given Sunday, it's a pretty nice guy to have. You can't really do that with Gilmore. Both very good players. If the Rams got either of them, I would be thrilled. But if you had to make a decision between those 2 guys, I think that Tyrann Mathieu is probably the way to go right there. Hit me up in the comments. Tell me what you think between those 2 guys and which of those 2 players you'd rather see come to the Rams. Okay, we're getting closer to the NFL draft. The Rams have 2 very big needs or 2 very big areas of need, I should say. We'll talk about which of those 2 things the Rams might address first. That is coming up in just a bit. But first, Bet Online, right? The baseball, speaking of baseball, we just talked a little bit about that. You can get all of your betting information, all of your odds at betonline.net for the baseball season. The basketball playoffs are just here. Now, like I said, you're probably a fan of the local baseball team. Maybe the more popular of the 2 basketball teams here in town didn't quite work out, but the other team's alive. They're going into the play-in round as well. The point is, all of your latest sports developments, league reviews, news, including the playoffs, the start of Major League Baseball, all of that. BetOnline is your continued source for everything regarding sports wagering, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and much, much more. Head to the website today. Use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. And now for a very big announcement. Coming up on Thursday, April 28th, you're going to want to tune in to the NFL's draft, or I should say the Locked On NFL draft coverage of the 2022 NFL draft. All 3 days of real-time analysis from our extensive lineup of experts and insiders. And for those of you dying to know who your team will take, you can catch the Odyssey and Locked On NFL's mock draft special hosted by Brian Peacock and former scout Matt Williamson of the Peacock and Williamson NFL show all week leading up to the first pick. Here are the who, what, whens, and wheres of it all. Locked On NFL Draft Live. That's Locked On the NFL Draft YouTube page. The Odyssey NFL Mock Draft. That's Odyssey and Locked On NFL Draft podcast feed. And the when is here you go. The draft, when the draft is coming up. April 28th. That's at 4 o'clock Pacific. The following day, it is at 3:30 Pacific. These are PM. And then April 30th, we're going to do a morning session, 8:30 a.m. Pacific, and the Odyssey NFL mock draft, April 18th through the 22nd and the 25th. You know where to find it. I just told you. And thanks again for making Locked On Rams your first listen every single day. Okay, so let's talk about the draft that's coming up at the end of this month. And obviously, the Rams have spent a lot of their draft capital in ways that other teams typically do not. The Rams will not have a pick until after the top 100 picks have gone off the board, unless, of course, a trade presents itself, which is always a possibility. But they're not picking in the first round. They're not picking in the second round. They're really not even picking in the third round until you get into the compensatory portion of the third round of the draft. And that's when the Rams will make their first appearance. And where they go, I think, is probably pretty obvious, right? They're going to go to one of two areas, because I think these are the two areas that they have the most obvious need. And then there's a third area, too, that I think may be kind of interesting. This kind of goes together with something I want to talk about in the following segment of the show. So make sure that you stick around and listen to that. Some guys that are already on the rosters that might be able to fill in some of these things as well. But you never know what you have it until you have it. So until you see them in live action, you got to have plan A, plan B, plan Q, plan X, the whole thing, something that the Rams have done very good on. But let's start right here. Defensive backs, offensive linemen. These are the first two areas of concern. When you look at this team and you look at where they are, skill players abound, right? Think about the most important positions on the field. The quarterback, they've got it covered. The wide receivers, they've more than got it covered, and they still might add Odell Beckham Jr. You have a guy what's the most important guy to protect your quarterback? Joe Noteboom. He just signed a long-term deal, so he's taking over for Andrew Whitworth. They got that locked up. On the other side of the ball, you need somebody to take away the other team's best player. Okay, that's Jalen Ramsey. He'll take away whatever offensive threat you have in the wide receiver position. He can do that. And then you need somebody to go get the quarterback and make life difficult for him. Oh, yeah, hey, how you doing, Aaron Donald? He's got you covered there. And if any of those things aren't quite what you need, I got Bobby Wagner. So you got all of these players all over the place when it comes to skill, high-profile positions. But what they need is some depth. And in particular, they're going to need somebody to start at that opposite corner. They're going to need somebody to step into that role. And if it's not in a starting role, then in some depth roles. And whether it's the opposite side of Jalen Ramsey, or maybe it's in the back end of the secondary, and you're talking about Fuller and Rapp and whoever else might be into that mix, I would not be surprised. And this is why we spend so much time talking about Gilmore, so much time we talked about Tyrann Mathieu, because these are the guys that are the most important guys for them moving forward, because those are the positions that they haven't gotten covered yet. I think the Rams will go to the defensive secondary first when it comes to the draft. I think they should. I think that's the place where they should spend most of their focus. And if that's not it, you need to get some offensive line depth, because what the Rams had an abundance of the last couple of years is something that they're going to be a little bit thinner on. Think about what we're talking about. All of a sudden, Austin Corbett is in Carolina. He's no longer a member of the team. So there's one starter down. You have Andrew Whitworth, who goes into retirement. There's two starters down out of the five guys. So you got 40% of your offensive line that you got to refigure. Now you got Noteboom. You slide him in the left tackle. You feel pretty good about that. You've got Coleman Shelton, who maybe comes in and tries again and get that right guard position right out of the chute. But now all of a sudden, Noteboom and Shelton were two of your number one backup guys that if somebody went hurt or if something had happened at any point, you needed, last year obviously was a COVID situation. Hopefully we don't have to deal with that anymore, but who knows what it is that if all of a sudden you need to test your depth. The Rams had depth. Now they don't. I would not be surprised to see if they didn't spend some of their draft capital going on some offensive line depth at that position to shore up what they had. Because what they've had the last few years is maybe they didn't have the number one offensive line unit in the entire NFL, but they had guys that were competent. They had guys that were serviceable. And what they had was depth too, and some flexibility. Like we were talking about with Mathieu in the secondary. You can put Noteboom at left tackle. You can put him at right tackle. You can even play him at guard if you needed to do it. We know that Corbett could go into center. We had some pieces that were very flexible along that offensive line. And right now, because your depth has gotten tested a little bit, I think that that's a bigger challenge for them. I think that's probably their second order of business once you get into draft day. Now, the other two things are maybe not quite as pressing of a need as those others, but I wouldn't be surprised if you saw him take a tight end at some point. I think that that's a position that the Rams are going to need to address because for the last few years, they've had depth there too. They've had Gerald Everett. They've had Tyler Higbee. They've had Johnny Munt. They've had guys that had been in the organization for a while, guys that understood what Sean McVay was about. And now you're starting, Munt is gone. Everett left 2 years ago. So you're seeing guys start to turn over and leave. Higbee's coming off of an injury. He should be a big part of what they do. But beyond that, you have a lot of very untested guys like Bryson Hopkins, who we'll talk about in just 1 minute. So I wouldn't be surprised if you saw them maybe try to find a tight end later on in the draft. I think that's a position that maybe once you're done addressing some more pressing needs, if you're looking to kind of gild the lily a little bit, maybe a tight end would not be a bad spot once you get in those 5th, 6th, and 7th rounds and take a flyer on a guy. I think you can probably find some good value at that position. And then lastly, it's a position you hope you never have to need. It's a position that you hope the guy never gets on the field and it never becomes an issue at all. And I know that you don't even like to say it out loud, but let's just say your quarterback goes down, right? And now all of a sudden, John Wolford is on the field and he's their guy and you got to play with him for a month or so, right? And knock on wood right now that this isn't something that they have to deal with anytime soon. I wouldn't mind having another option. I wouldn't mind having just somebody else that could come in. And maybe we saw Perkins last year, and these are guys that could, maybe fill the roles here and there, but you really can't try too many guys in camp. And if it's a 6th, 7th round pick and you just want to get some arms in camp and see what it looks like, the Rams have had some pretty good success with late round picks, undrafted guys along the way. Bring them in and see what it looks like. Would not hate to see what another quarterback in a Rams uniform looks like beyond Matthew Stafford and John Wolford along the way. So we'll see if that's not an area that they seem that they want to address moving forward. But you got to start in the secondary. You got to start in the offensive line. And after that, I think it's probably tight end and maybe a little bit of quarterback just for some depth, organizational depth, and some guys just to take a look at in training camp. You never know what you're going to find in those situations. Okay, coming up in just a bit, some of the guys that are already on the roster and how they can really kind of determine what the Rams are going to do in the draft and what they can do moving forward as far as taking chances on other draft picks and run it back all over again. Some names on the team already that need to step up big time. That's coming up, but not before we talk about how you can get your car fixed for a lot less, right? Rock Auto. You've seen the commercials, Rock Auto. I'm a good singer like that. Save time and money when you use Rock Auto, right? How many different cars, how many different makes, how many different models, how many different years, right? Think of all the variations on all the different parts. They have it at the place you're about to go drive to? Maybe, maybe not, right? Save your time and your money and just go online, rockauto.com. Why choose to spend 30%, 50%, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or a dealership? Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 30 years. The prices are always reliably low for every single person, and they're going to have exactly what you need. Brakes, tail lamps, motor oil, new carpet for the car, you name it, they got it at Rock Auto. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. And as always, write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you over there. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need, rockauto.com. Thanks for making Locked On Rams your first listen every single day. My name is Travis Rogers. Click that subscribe button, both on the Locked On Rams YouTube page and, of course, your Locked On Rams podcast feed as well, free and available wherever you get your podcasts, right in your feed, your team, every single day. Okay, so talked about some needs that they could address in the secondary. We talked about where they may go in the draft and which of those positions they may target in the draft. Here's where the Rams have a really unique philosophy on how they do these things, right? If that's the right word. They've got some guys that are on the roster right now that have a chance to step into some starting roles and really take some of the pressure off the organization to hit home runs late in the draft. We've talked about it before. The Rams, obviously you want to hit home runs in your first round draft pick. Where the Rams have been remarkably good is finding not just players, but very good players, third round, fourth round, fifth round, sixth round, and beyond, right? We did that a couple of days ago, whether it's Cooper Kupp or whether it's Rob Havenstein or just these guys that are not at the top of the draft, but they come up and they become incredibly useful players for the Rams, starting players. John Johnson is another one. Joe Noteboom, Brian Allen. These guys are all starting for them or other teams, Sebastian Joseph Day, other teams And these are guys they found well outside the first 2 rounds of the draft. Robert Rochelle has a chance to get that other corner job. If Jalen Ramsey is on one side of the field, I think the first guy that's going to get a chance to do it is Robert Rochelle. He was very close to sliding into that starting role and replacing Darius Williams during the regular season before he went down. I think he probably would have grabbed it and might have been able to hang on to it. So if he can go into camp and he can get off to a good start and he can be that player, then whoever you're drafting in the 3rd round, 4th round, 6th round, 7th round to play corner, they don't have to walk in on day 1 as a 6th-round draft pick and say, okay, let's figure out how you're going to start against the 49ers in a few weeks. You don't have to do that. You can ease them in a little bit more slowly. This is another component to the McVay Snead draft philosophy that I think gets lost in the shuffle a little bit. They draft for the future, and they're not drafting to have a guy become their starting player 4 years later like Joe Noteboom necessarily, but they draft a guy like that thinking, okay, if we can have him behind a guy that is an established player, learn from that guy, and then we can slide him in, they'll be ready to go. And I think that's something that could go on with Robert Rochelle, that he had some opportunities. Look, if it doesn't work, they're going to move on and go to the guy that they did draft or the guys that they do draft or the guys that they sign in free agency. And if none of those guys do it, the Rams will go into the trade market because they've proven this is how they can build their team as well. But if he could step up, it really allows your depth, your second stringers, even your third stringers, to really kind of get their NFL feet wet without having to do it in game time action. So when it does come time to do it, and we've seen it happen at the end of the season, we'll talk about Bryson Hopkins here in a little bit, they're capable and they're ready to go in that moment. So he has a big opportunity in front of him. You could almost say the exact same thing, too, about Coleman Shelton. The Coleman Shelton has been kind of the offensive line depth along the way, and now he's got a chance to slide in at right guard for Austin Corbett. Austin Corbett is in Carolina. Now, does he hold on to it? Time will tell. Do they find somebody in the 3rd round, the 5th round that they can slide in there that maybe might play a little bit better? Perhaps. But he's going to have the inside track on it. And again, this is another guy that they signed during the offseason. They just re-signed to keep him here. And this allows them to, whoever the guy that's coming in, take a breath, understand what we're doing. It's not trial by fire. Somebody's going to have to go in there and play pretty darn green. That's the way it is. And Coleman Shelton, in the grand scheme of things, is pretty green, but he's not green like a rookie coming off of a college campus. He's not green like a rookie coming off of a 5th or 6th round selection and just kind of saying, okay, we got a 6th rounder at right. Who knows how that's going to work out? These are the guys that can allow this thing to really bake, to really set in and take a lot of pressure off these guys that are coming in next, which brings us to the last guy, Bryson Hopkins. Another tight end. Look, Tyler Higbee is a good NFL tight end. Is he the second coming of Kittle or Travis Kelce? Probably not, but he's pretty darn good. But you saw what that offense looked like when he went down in the playoffs and he wasn't around. That position got very thin very, very quickly. And all of a sudden, Hopkins, who would never get the ball, started getting the ball pretty regularly. And he was ready. And he made big plays. He made a touchdown catch. He was on the field in the biggest moments of the biggest games of the season, and he held his own. And this is what they do. These wave of guys, whether it's Hopkins or Rochelle or Shelton, that these are the guys that were drafted a few years ago that you didn't know their names. I didn't know their names. They're just guys you picked. Okay, let's see what happened. And that's this new wave of guys that are going to come in here at the end of the month when they draft these guys and they go to the next way. And then these guys are here. And when they go somewhere else in 2 years or 3 years, the guys that haven't even been picked yet are ready to go. And that is as much of the secret sauce as F them picks. That is much of the success of the Rams as going out and trading for Matthew Stafford, because they hit on the late round picks and they don't have to necessarily throw them into the fire in that first week of the season, that first half of the season. Let it bake during practice. Let it bake during meetings a little bit. Let him get some time during that preseason. Let him get some reps when the team maybe has a comfortable lead along the way. So when it comes time to do it for real, they're ready to go. And those 3 guys in particular, I think, are going to have a very, very big opportunity to step up and earn some starting jobs. And if not starting jobs, some very significant snap counts along the way. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Rams. Thanks for making us our first listen every single day. Now make your second listen, Locked On NFL Draft. Ryan Tracy and former NFL corner Eric Crocker bringing you the NFL Draft, and they bring it to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It, too, is free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, whose house? It's Locked On Rams house.